He walked into the awards luncheon with a manila envelope tucked under his arm, and the easy confidence of a man who had already decided how this story ended. Brett Winslow set it on the table in front of his wife of 7 years, beside her water glass, in front of 14 of her colleagues, in the exact middle of the moment she had spent 11 years building toward. He said, "We need to..." Now, he said it the way people say things they've rehearsed in the mirror until the words start to feel like gravity. Inevitable. Already decided. Waverly Nolan looked at the envelope. Then she looked at her husband. She did not move. She had 9 hours left before she would sign a $720 million federal infrastructure contract. He had absolutely no idea. Before we go any further, if you believe that what you build in silence speaks louder than anything someone else says about you, subscribe to Crimson Secrets. Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from, and let's see how far this one travels. The morning had started the way mornings do when something is about to change permanently. Quiet, ordinary, the kind of stillness that doesn't announce itself. Waverly had been awake since 4:15, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that she had not opened her work laptop, had not reviewed the structural load calculations sitting in her queue since Thursday. Instead, she had sat at the kitchen counter of their house, in the Heights neighborhood of Houston, drinking coffee. She let go cold while rereading, for what she estimated was 43rd time in 3 years, the contract term sheet for the Gulf Coast Resilience Initiative, a federal program administered through the Army Corps of Engineers. 300 miles of sustainable flood barriers infrastructure along the Texas and Louisiana coastline. Communities that had spent 20 years losing their homes to rising water and bureaucratic indifference, and the particular exhaustion of being told help was coming. The contract value $720 million over 7 years. The selected contractor, as of a signing meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon at the federal building on Rusk Street, Verdant Systems, LLC, a company Waverly had co-founded with her business partner, Luca Ortega, in the back room of a coffee shop in Midtown 3 years ago. Incorporated in Delaware, capitalized with her premarital savings and 2 competitive research grants awarded in her name alone, and operated in total professional secrecy whilst she maintained her day job as a senior structural engineer at Alderton and Associates, the firm that had today, at the Thursday Awards luncheon, planned to announce her elevation to senior principal. She had kept these 2 lives completely separate, not because she was deceptive by nature, but because she had learned something in 11 years of engineering that most people learn much later if they learn it at all. That an unfinished structure is the most vulnerable version of itself. You don't let people walk on a bridge before the load-bearing elements are in place. You don't show people what you're building until it can hold weight. Verdant Systems could now hold significant weight. Brett had come downstairs at 7:30 in his running clothes, seen her at the counter and said, "You look like you haven't slept." She had not looked up. "I slept fine. The luncheon's at noon." "I know." He had poured himself a smoothie, cleaned the blender with the efficiency of someone who found household tasks satisfying in a way that conversation wasn't anymore, and left without asking what she was reading. He had stopped asking about her work a long time ago. Not in one dramatic moment, not in a fight she could point to later and say, "There, that was when." The way a river changes course sometimes, gradually, then completely, until you look up one day and the water is running somewhere you don't recognize. She had noticed, she had chosen, for reasons that made sense at the time, and made a different kind of sense now, to keep building anyway. The awards luncheon at Alderton and Associates was held in the firm's top-floor conference suite, glass-walled, overlooking downtown Houston, with a view that made the city look, on a clear November day, like something a person might actually design on purpose. 40 people. Partners, associates, junior engineers, 2 clients. The good champagne that only appeared 3 or 4 times a year. Waverly sat in a charcoal blazer she had bought 8 months ago for exactly this occasion, and talked to her colleagues and ate lunch and waited. She had been waiting 11 years. A few more minutes was nothing. James Alderton, the firm's founding partner, 62, with the measured delivery of a man who had testified before congressional subcommittees and never lost the thread, stood at the front of the room and began to speak about the senior principal elevation. He described rigor. He described the evolution of the firm. He said Waverly's name and described, in terms that were accurate and slightly more generous than she would have chosen herself, 11 years of work that included 2 projects recognized by the American Society of Civil Engineers and a structural solution to a bridge rehabilitation problem in Corpus Christi that had saved the city approximately $40 million in projected repair costs. Waverly was aware, from somewhere in the middle of James's remarks, that the door to the conference suite had opened. She registered a figure in the doorway. Then the figure moved, and she recognized Brett, and she saw the envelope. And she saw his expression, the expression of a man performing a necessary thing. He had dressed for it. She noted that. The gray blazer, the good watch. He had dressed for this the way he dressed for investor presentations. He walked to the table. 14 pairs of eyes tracked him. James stopped speaking mid-sentence. Brett set the envelope directly in front of her. "We need to talk," he said, "now." The room went quiet in the way rooms do when something irreversible has just entered them. Waverly looked at the envelope. She thought about what she knew of structures under stress, that the difference between a material that shatters and a material that holds is not strength alone. It is the capacity to absorb force without becoming it. She thought about the meeting at 2 o'clock on Rusk Street. She thought about the 43rd time she had read that term sheet this morning. She looked up at Brett. "This is a work event," she said, evenly, quietly. "I know what it is," he said. "This is something we need to handle." James cleared his throat. "Brett, perhaps." "It's fine," Waverly said to James. Then to Brett, "What is that?" "You know what it is." He said it without cruelty, which was the version of it she had come to understand as his particular register. The kind that believes it is simply being honest. "I had them drawn up last month. I've been waiting for the right time, and there isn't one, so." The room had the quality of 40 people, trying very hard to be somewhere else. "You're serving me divorce papers," Waverly said, "in front of my colleagues, on the day I'm being named senior principal." Brett exhaled. "I didn't plan the timing." "You walked in here with a manila envelope," she said. "You planned something." "A beat," he recalibrated. "Then, I've been unhappy for a long time. I think you know that." "I know you stopped telling me." "You're never here?" The words came out with a compression that told her they had been held for a long time, shaped into something that felt like fact. "You work until 10, 11 o'clock. You travel. You have conversations I'm not part of. I have been trying to build a life and you have been somewhere else for years." She thought about 3 years of pre-dawn mornings, about Luca's spreadsheets and her structural models, and the 6 months of Grantis applications that came back rejected before the 7th didn't. About the nights she had driven home from the co-working space on Westheimer with the bone-deep tiredness of someone doing 2 jobs the threshold of what a person can sustain, and had slipped into bed beside Brett without waking him, and had lain in the dark thinking about load-bearing calculations and federal procurement timelines. He was not wrong that she had been somewhere else. He did not know where. "Is there someone else?" she asked. He was quiet for exactly the amount of time it takes a person to decide whether truth is something they owe. "Her name is Kira," he said. "She works in commercial real estate. He stopped. "How long?" 5 months. The room did not move. 5 months. Waverly had been in the final phase of Verdant Systems' federal proposal process for the past 5 months, 14-hour days across 2 jobs, running on coffee and the particular focused clarity that comes when you are close enough to something that the finish line is no longer abstract. She had been doing all of that while Brett had been 2 steps to the left, choosing someone else. She picked up the envelope. She thought about the term sheet on her kitchen counter this morning, about Luca's voice on the phone 6 weeks ago. "They moved us to the short list. We're one of 4. Then, 3 weeks ago, were the only one left. She thought about the encrypted drive in her desk at home, with 3 years of structural models and financial projections that Brett had never once asked to see, never once looked at, because he had stopped looking. She thought, the most important thing I have ever built does not exist to him. Okay, she said. Brett blinked. Okay? I'll sign, but not here. Send them to my attorney. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and looked at James Alderton, who had the expression of a man who had seen many things in 40 years of professional life and was filing this one in a category of its own. I'm sorry for the interruption, she said to the room. Then to Brett, without malice, without performance, with the simple clarity of someone who has already decided what comes next. You should go. Brett left, the door closed, the room exhaled. James Alderton looked at her for a moment, then he picked up his champagne glass and said, as I was saying. The laughter that moved through the room was the kind that releases something. She stayed for 45 minutes. She shook hands and accepted congratulations and deflected questions about Brett with the practiced ease of someone who has been managing 2 sets of information simultaneously for 3 years. At 12:50 she excused herself, went to the restroom, and stood at the mirror for 30 seconds. Not for composure. She had composure. She stood there because she wanted to mark the moment. The last moment of the part of her life that had been provisional, held in waiting, built in the dark, while the official version moved along a different track. She opened her phone, a message from Luca, all parties on site. We're a go for 2 p.m. You good? She typed, I'm good, see you there. She tucked the phone away, walked out of Alderton and Associates, and hailed a cab on Travis Street. Luca was waiting on the steps of the federal building when she arrived. He looked at her and said, You look like something happened. Something happened, she said. I'll tell you after. He held the door. Should I be worried? You should be focused, she said. We have a contract to sign. The conference room on the 14th floor held 9 people from 3 federal agencies. The lead engineer from the Gulf Coast Infrastructure Review Board was a woman named Dr. Amara Park, 54, with a Ph.D. in coastal hydrology from UT Austin and the particular focus of someone who had spent 11 months evaluating a proposal until she knew it better than most of its authors. She said to Waverly when she sat down, The tidal variance modification in your 3rd revision of the Terrebonne barrier model, that was yours. Yes, Waverly said. Our internal team spent 3 weeks trying to find a flaw in it, Dr. Park said. Did they find one? No, a pause, that's why we're here. The signing took 1 hour and 20 minutes. Waverly signed each page the way she approached every structural calculation. Completely, thoroughly, no assumptions. When the last signature was on the last page, Luca sat back and pressed both hands flat on the table and said, under his breath, to no one in particular, 7 years. She knew what he meant. Her phone had 14 missed calls from Brett by the time she walked out of the federal building. She listened to one voicemail. His voice was different. The rehearsed flatness of the luncheon was gone. What was underneath was something she recognized as the first edge of a man realizing he was wrong about something he had been completely certain of. Waverly, call me back. Someone told me. Just call me. There's something I need to understand before anything gets filed. She did not call him. She called her attorney. Claire Chen had been practicing family law in Houston for 18 years and operated on the principle that the clearest path through a situation is usually the straight line from the facts. She answered on the 2nd ring. Waverly told her everything, the luncheon, the envelope, Brett's speech, about unhappiness, about Kira, about 5 months. Then she told her the other thing, the thing Claire already knew because Waverly had retained her 3 months ago to review exactly this scenario. The papers were served today, Waverly said, not filed. The divorce petition requires both signatures and formal court filing. Correct, Claire said. Verdant Systems closed the Gulf Coast contract at approximately 3:15 this afternoon. $20 million. I hold 52% equity as sole majority shareholder. The company was incorporated prior to our marriage. The current contract value was generated during the marriage. Silence on the line, a precise professional silence. Under Texas community property law, Claire said carefully, equity appreciation in a business during the marriage is subject to division. I know, Waverly said. The papers were served today, not filed. The community property period doesn't end until legal separation or finalized divorce, not service of papers. Yes, Waverly said. Brett's attorney is going to figure this out, Claire said, probably by tomorrow morning. Which is why I need every founding document time-stamped and organized before his attorney runs a search. Already started, Claire said. Waverly, you researched this law 18 months ago. A beat. I researched the law, Waverly said. I didn't know when he was going to serve papers. That was his timing, not mine. I know the distinction, Claire said. I wanted you to know that I know it. The next morning, Brett's attorney, a man named Turner Reeves, with a boutique practice in River Oaks, filed an emergency motion to freeze the classification of Verdant Systems equity pending equitable distribution proceedings. The motion failed. Claire had anticipated every argument. The corporate structure was clean. The IP chain of title was clean. The premarital capitalization was fully documented. Reeves came into a settlement meeting 2 weeks later and opened with a demand for 30% of the company's current equity valuation, arguing that Waverly's professional labor during the marriage had been a diverted marital resource. Waverly let him finish. Then she said, the founding capital came from my premarital savings. The 2 research grants were awarded to me individually. Brett's financial contributions to the household were offset entirely by my salary. His claim is that my time was a marital resource. He's welcome to make that argument in front of a judge. She looked at Reeves directly. I want a clean dissolution. He keeps his business interests, his accounts, his property. I keep Verdant Systems, no ongoing claims. Reeves asked for 20 minutes and came back in 15. Mr. Winslow, he said carefully, is prepared to accept those terms. The settlement was signed 3 days later. What Waverly learned afterward, from Luca, who heard it from a contact in the commercial real estate industry, was that Brett's firm had lost a major development bid the same week. A mixed-use project in Galveston they had spent months positioning for. The loss was connected, indirectly, to coastal zoning shifts triggered by the Gulf Coast Resilience Initiative. Infrastructure investment at the scale of the federal contract changed what could be built where, and Brett's could be built there, and Brett's Galveston project had been modeled on assumptions that no longer held. He had positioned himself for a future that Waverly's work had made obsolete. Not through her intention, not through any action she had taken against him, simply as the ordinary consequence of building something large enough to change the conditions around it. She heard this and felt something she could not neatly name, not satisfaction, not sorrow. Something closer to the feeling at the end of a long project, when the structure stands and is load-tested and you look at it and understand that whatever it cost was the cost, and you would pay it again. Construction on the Gulf Coast Resilience Initiative began in Terrebonne Parish the following spring. Waverly was on site for the first barrier segment installation, standing in mud boots at the edge of a marsh that had been losing ground to the Gulf for 2 decades, watching the structural intervention her model said would hold for 50 years. A woman was standing nearby, 63 years old, gray-haired, in a jacket with her granddaughter's name stitched on the pocket. Her name was Doris Thibodeau, and she had lived on this land until a storm surge took her house 4 years ago. She had been living in her daughter's spare room since and coming back to this shoreline on weekends because, she said, the water held her husband's ashes in it, and she was not ready to stop visiting. She introduced herself to Waverly and asked, "Are you the one who designed this?" "One of the ones," Waverly said. Doris looked at the installation in progress. "Is it going to work?" "Yes," Waverly said. "The model has held through every test we've run. It's going to work." Doris was quiet a moment. Then, My husband used to say that the most important thing you can build is something that lets people stay. Waverly stood in the marsh and thought about that. About 7 years of building in the dark. About a luncheon and a manila envelope and a man who had shown up in his good watch to deliver a verdict on a woman he no longer recognized. About the federal building on Rusk Street and a signature on a contract that meant something real was going to exist in the world that hadn't been there before. She thought about Brett's voice on the voicemail, the roughness in it, the first tremor of a man realizing his certainty had been misplaced. His error had not been in his assessment of the marriage. Maybe the marriage had genuinely run its course, and she had been too busy to formally acknowledge it. But his error was in his assessment of her, of what she was building, when he looked over and saw no one there. She had been everywhere he couldn't see. It is, Waverly said to Doris. That's exactly what it's designed to do. That evening she sat in her new apartment, a top-floor unit in Midtown, spare and clean and entirely hers, with her laptop open to the Verdant Systems structural database. Terrebonne Parish was segment 1. There were 14 more along the coast, 3 additional federal contracts in the proposal pipeline, a methodology paper the Journal of Coastal Engineering had requested. There was so much left to build. Her phone buzzed. Luca, Forbes Innovators list drops Thursday. I'm told to check page 47. She typed back, tell me after we close the second contract. He replied with one word, deal. Waverly set the phone aside. She opened the methodology paper. She found the last sentence she had written and read it twice. She picked up exactly where she had left off. Somewhere in Houston, in an office in River Oaks, a man was on his 4th call of the evening, trying to understand how a woman he had written off, as unavailable, as absent, as somewhere else, had been building something that weighed $720 million, trying to locate the exact moment when he had stopped paying enough attention to see what was standing directly in front of him. She had no interest in that question. She had answered it for herself a long time ago in a Midtown coffee shop, with a business plan on a legal pad and a conviction so clear and so quietly held that it required no one's acknowledgement to be real. She had never needed him to see it. She had only needed to build it, and she was only just getting started.